Hello.
Hello, Internet, YouTube, wherever we are right now.
Instagram, Facebook, Twitter.
That one torrent tracker you found on like the deep web or something. I don't know. So anyway, do you even have the slightest idea what we're doing here today?
No.
Okay, I've got here a folder full of Yu-Gi-Oh cards on my computer.
Okay.
Your job is to look at each one, and we're gonna go over them, and you can ask me questions, and we're gonna and you're gonna have to figure out if this card is good or not.
Okay.
So.
How many are we going through?
Several. So, your first card.
Oh, I remember this.
Is the Blue Eyes White Dragon.
Thanks.
It is a level 8 monster, light dragon, 3,000 attack and 2,500 defense.
I'd say it,
How powerful do you think this card is? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Do you think it's terrible? Great?
It used to be really good. I think it's medium now. Medium to high.
Okay, that's a very specific one and actually very accurate. So here's the deal. This was, I believe, yeah, this was the highest attack on a monster when it first came out. This was the most powerful card in the game by sheer numbers. It was a little bit harder to bring out. There were better cards at the time that could be brought out easier. Over time, the issue with this card has become that it does not have any effect. It still has a decent attack, but it does not have an effect, which makes it worse. However, the Blue Eyes White Dragon is so popular that it has had a ton of support over the years. So this card still has so much support that it still gets played. So it's still
following.
Essentially, yes. So it has a lot. Well, when I say support, I mean it has a lot of other cards that work with it. So if I say the word support, that means it has other cards that support it. So there's a lot of other cards that keep, and that's what keeps this card still somewhat played. It's not, the card itself isn't very good anymore, but it has so many other cards work around it that it is still kind of useful. So our next card, another oldie, Exodia the Forbidden One. This is another classic one right here. This is a very, very, very famous card.
You know, this one is not strong by itself, but obviously if you have all of the other ones with it, then, you know, that's just...
That is true. I mean,
that's the ultimate thing.
If you have all 5, you just win outright.
Yeah.
So how good do you think that is? Obviously, I will say this, that is the best effect you could possibly have.
Right. I doubt if it's easy to do that. But
that's the thing. How easy is it to do? So how easy do you think it is?
Okay, so from 0 to 5, 5 being the most, I'd say it's probably about a 2.
A 2? You're probably not wrong. It's a little bit weird. There have been a few Exodia decks over the years that have had some success. I think there was one that even did really well at like a world championship. But overall, Exodia is not that good.
Okay.
The effect of winning the game is very good. The circumstances in which you have to do it are just, it's kind of tricky to do, you know. Typically, any deck that kind of does it has to be very weird. It has to kind of stall the game out. So our next card is a newer card, newer relatively. It's called Max C, and it is a bunch of cockroaches.
Interesting.
And you can ask questions. So during either, okay. So basically what this card does...
That could be helpful, but I don't think it's very good.
You don't think it's very good? So let's say out of 10. What would you give this card out of 10? A 4? Okay, so this card, you send it from your hand to the graveyard during either player's turn, so you can do it during your opponent's turn when they're getting ready to play cards. And then each time that turn they special summon a monster, you get to draw a card.
Right, and that could be helpful, but you know...
It's a good... Like, obviously that's a decent effect, but is it... How good is it? So good that card is banned. That card is banned from tournaments.
Oh, wow.
Or just official play in general. That card is banned. This card is very good. I've had this card used against me. It sucks because it puts you in kind of a catch-22. You can either stop special summoning, which in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a death sentence to not special summon, or you can give your opponent just a ton of cards, which also is just not a good situation to be in. So this card is very, very good, you know. The ability this kind of card is called a hand trap because it's just a card you can just play straight from your hand even during your opponent's turn. And just the ability to draw multiple cards like that, or your opponent has to not play, you know.
Right.
So it just puts your opponent in a very, very bad situation. Our next card, another older one, Zone Eater. This is another card. This card's actually pretty well known. So what that effect means is that if this card battles another monster, even if that card is destroyed, so if the opponent's monster wins, it'll still be destroyed after the 5th turn.
You know, it doesn't look very powerful, but I think that's pretty good. I think that's a 6 out of 10. I think that's a 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10? Okay. This card is considered one of the worst Yu-Gi-Oh cards ever made.
Really? Mm-hmm. Wow.
Because it destroys a monster during the end of the 5th turn after it battles.
Right.
This card, to have to wait 5 turns to destroy a monster is terrible.
Okay.
Because there are cards, even when this card came out back then, there were cards that you could just straight up destroy a monster right then and there.
Yeah, but if you have a really powerful monster card that your opponent does, that it's really hard to... you don't have anything to get that opponent's monster card, and he has a really powerful monster, then it would kill that monster.
In 5 turns. The game could be over by then.
Okay.
That's the problem.
Okay.
The problem is that oftentimes the game might not even last that long.
Okay.
And there's a million cards that will get rid of monsters. So this card is probably one of the worst ways to get rid of a monster. There are so many other cards. You know, Raigeki is one that can just play it and your monsters are gone. Your opponent's monsters.
Raigeki.
I don't know if I have that on this list, but that's just another card we might look at. Next card is
I like that with blossoms.
We'll get to that one. This is called Foolish Burial.
Send that monster from your deck to the graveyard. Yeah, I don't know. That one I'm not sure about.
This is one people that don't play Yu-Gi-Oh, that play other card games, or that are new, get very tripped up by this card. This card is very good. It was actually banned for a while. The ability to send any monster from your deck to the graveyard is essentially getting any monster. Oftentimes in Yu-Gi-Oh, you want cards in your graveyard. There are so many effects that work with cards in your graveyard or can be activated from the graveyard that being able to send any monster you want from your deck to the graveyard is basically a free pass to just do whatever you want.
To be able to revive him.
Or to revive it, or to do something else with that card.
So that's pretty powerful.
It's a very, very powerful card.
We'll give it an 8.
What'd you say?
We'll give it an 8.
Maybe, yeah. It's still limited, I think, to 1 copy. Like, you're still only allowed to have 1 copy of this card in your deck today. If I might be mistaken on that, I think that's what it's at. Next card. Mirror Force. This is another very, very famous card.
Opponent's monster declares an attack. Oh yeah, that's awesome. I want that.
Okay. This is a weird one. This is another one that kind of trips people up because it's a card that looks very good. Mm-hmm. And it is.
Yeah.
But it doesn't get played a ton. That's the thing anymore. The thing is,
why not?
Battle traps have kind of gone out of style, I guess is the word. And this is, like I said, this is still a good card. But it's not as widely played anymore. It does still see play. It's still good. It's just not, like, back when this card came out, it was awesome. And it was banned, I think, a few times for a little bit. I don't know exactly, but it's been... You know, it's still a decent card, and there's other versions of it that are better, that do things like sending... In modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, sending cards to your opponent's deck can actually be preferable to sending them to their graveyard.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
And there's a version of Mirror Force, I think it's Drowning Mirror Force, that does that, and that card is, I think in some cases, better. Okay. As weird as that sounds. Next up, we have Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. There's a bit of text on this one. So it's basically trading one for one. You get rid of that card in order to stop your opponent from activating one of those types of effects.
Well, you can also send a card from the deck to the graveyard, so there's that again. You can only use this effect.
No. That negates one of your opponent's effects that does that.
Oh, okay.
So you're stopping your opponent from doing one of those.
That's still powerful, right?
Yes.
That's still pretty powerful. Add a card from the deck to the hand. I think that's powerful.
That is a good card. This card this card gets used a lot because it can stop your opponent from... If you play it right, you can just shut down your opponent. You can shut down one of your opponent's key cards that tries to get out. If you're trying to search out a specific card, you play that. You can potentially just shut them down entirely. This card is actually pretty expensive. This card, I think it's gone down, but this at one point was like an $80 card because of just how good it was. And I mean, it still is. I mean, there's a few other cards that have similar effects. This one is the most played.
Okay.
And this card gets played a lot. So our next card is Blackluster Soldier. And now, for reference, I also have Blackluster Ritual here. So what?
How many monsters do you have to tribute?
So here's how it works. You play that card. You have to have both that card and Blackluster Soldier in your hand. You play the spell card. You can get rid of monsters from your field or your hand, and all of their levels have to equal 8 or more. It can be as many or as few as you want. If you have a level 8 monster, it can just be that one.
Okay, got it.
And then you just special summon that card. So how good do you think
Let me see the other one.
this card is? Just as another note, you cannot play that card without the spell card.
I think it is pretty good, but like a 6.
A 6? It's not very good.
Okay.
The problem is
you have to have both.
you have to have both, and you can't really do it other than that. Ritual monsters, which is this kind of card, have been very weird over the years, and there have been good ritual monsters. There have been, especially in more there was Relinquished, which is one, and in more recent years there have been some very, very good archetypes that revolve around ritual monsters, but they kind of have to really, really try hard to be good because of how they kind of have these limiting factors around them. But
so I'll remember that. If you have to have 2 cards, that in itself just makes it more difficult.
it's more difficult. Not necessarily bad, but the card itself needs to be better to be worth it.
Okay.
Or it needs to be some way to get it out easier. And on a side note, we have a related card. Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos. This is not a ritual monster, even though it's blue. This is a link monster.
Okay. Tell me about it then. I won't read it.
Okay, so what this card, you need to have 3 monsters on your field that have different names. If you link summon it using a level 7 or higher monster, your opponent cannot target that card with card effects. And it cannot be destroyed by card effects.
Okay.
When it destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can activate one of those 3 effects, which are that monster gains 1500 attack. It can make a second attack during the next turn, or you can banish 1 card on the field, which is like super destroying it.
I think that's very good.
It is a very good
I'm going
card.
to give that a 10. A 9 or a 10.
I wouldn't give it a 9 or a 10, but it's still very good.
Still very
it's
good.
a very good card. It's very versatile. It's just powerful. It's like, it is once again a very expensive card too, but it's just a very, very good card. This is a fun one to do. Yada Garasu.
Okay, tell me about it.
So, this is a spirit monster, which is kind of a not super common type of card that it can't be special summoned. It has to be just normal summon, which is you can only do 1 normal summon per turn. And during the end of your turn, it comes back to your hand.
Okay.
But if you can inflict battle damage to your opponent with that card, your opponent doesn't draw a card on their next turn. They skip their draw phase.
Yeah, but you know it's only got an attack of 200.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's very good.
You don't think it's very good?
No.
This card is not very good.
Okay, I didn't think so.
However,
It's pretty.
it's been banned for almost over a decade.
Why?
It was involved in what is known as the Yada Lock, which was a combo with this and a couple of other cards that made it so that your opponent had no cards in their hand, no cards on their field, and did not get to draw at the start of their turn.
Oh, wow.
So you would get your opponent into that position. Every turn you would summon that card, attack your opponent for a tiny amount of damage, end your turn, and your opponent would not be able to draw and wouldn't be able to do anything. It was such a big problem. This was actually one of the first banned cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! And in certain Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games, I don't know which ones, if you do this to your opponent, the AI is programmed to surrender. If you can get that strategy off.
No, stop. If you
do that strategy that makes it so your opponent can't play anything, the AI in those games is programmed to know that and to surrender. Because it can't do anything.
Oh.
It's basically...
Oh, okay.
But the thing is, I don't think that strategy is possible anymore. But even if it were, nowadays there's so many card effects that can be activated from the graveyard, it wouldn't be as bad as it was. There would be a lot more ways to stop this. So it wouldn't be as good. Mystical Space Typhoon.
I think that's pretty good. I mean, it's not spectacular, but that's a pretty good thing to be able to do.
One thing to note about this card is that it is quick play.
Okay.
This means two things. One, you can play it at any point during your turn, and not just... Normally, there's only a certain phase of your turn where you can play cards. This card you can play during other phases. And you can even play it face down and play it during your opponent's turn. This card is very good. It's a good card. It's a very solid card to the point that it has been at points called like one of the most played cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because of how versatile and useful this card is.
Okay. It's
not the most powerful card, but it's just very extremely useful in pretty much every deck. Like this card still sees play. There's better versions of this card, and this card still sees play. Because it's just useful to be able to just destroy a card on a spell or trap on the field. That has always been a good effect. Our next card is... Ahaha! This is a fun one too. Solemn Judgment. This is a trap card. So if your opponent would summon a monster or play a spell or trap card, you can pay half of your life points to negate that card and stop it from happening.
Okay, stop. Say that again.
So if your opponent would play a monster, a spell, or a trap, you can pay half of your life points to stop that from happening.
Because they might have something really spectacular that's really going to harm you.
Potentially.
So I would say that's pretty
strong.
But
half of your life points is a pretty steep cost.
It is. Of what you have, not what you started with.
Yeah, of just whatever you have right now.
I'd say that's incredibly valuable if somebody's coming in and doing something.
You would be correct. This card's excellent. This is a very good card to have. It sees a lot of play. It actually didn't when it first came out because people were a little reluctant to give up half of their life points. But over time, people started to realize that just the value of being able to stop basically anything, almost anything, is just way too good to give up for the cost. It's just a very, very good effect. This is Ancient Fairy Dragon. So this is a synchro monster, which means you need to have, basically, if you have one tuner and one or more non-tuner monsters, this is going to be weird. Basically, you have to have monsters on your side of the field whose level equals that, and then you can summon it. And you don't have to have it in your hand. You don't have that card in your hand. You have it in a separate pile that is separate from your deck. So you can just play it as long as you meet its requirements. So once per turn, you can special summon one level 4 or lower monster from your hand. So that's just basically an extra summon. But if you do that, you can't attack that turn with anything.
I think that's just mediocre.
Wait. Once per turn, you can destroy as many field spells on the field as possible. And if you do, gain 1,000 life points and then add a field spell from your deck to your hand.
If you kill the field spells, then you get to add 1,000.
I think so. I'm not a super Yu-Gi-Oh! Expert. I don't know. I think it might...
It sounds valuable. I think it sounds pretty valuable. I'd give it a 7 or an 8.
Okay, here's the deal. This card, when it came out, was awful.
Oh, sounds good.
Nowadays it's banned.
Oh, wow.
This is a case of a card The big deal with this card is field spells. Field spells used to be bad. They used to not be very good. Nowadays, some of the best cards are field spells. Some of them. There are some very, very good field spells. Next card. Matter of fact, let's do a field spell real quick. Here's a field spell. This card is called Mystic Mine.
Okay.
So, basically what this card does is the person who ever controls more monsters cannot attack or activate the effects of their monsters. And at the end of either player's turn, if both players have the same amount of monsters, that card is destroyed. So if you have more monsters, you can't attack, but if your opponent doesn't, then they can't attack. Whoever has more monsters, you or your opponent, cannot attack or activate the effects of their monsters. And then during the end
obviously you're not going to use it unless it's beneficial, I would hope.
That's typically what you would do with this.
Yeah. Typically.
Typically, yeah. I mean, your opponent might be able to get something around, but...
I don't know. I think it's okay.
So this card has become infamous as being one of the most annoying and aggravating cards to play against, because it can completely shut you down. And I have played against my brother, and my brother has played this card. It is not fun. It's a it's very much a pain in the butt to work around, and you need cards almost like Mystical Space Typhoon to destroy a card on the field to get rid of this thing. It can be very much of a it's called a floodgate because it just stops you, you know. And monster effects are very important in Yu-Gi-Oh! So just shutting that down entirely is not... It can be very, very good. A lot of people kind of want this card banned because it's just a little bit too... it can just win you a game in a lot of cases. I believe that this is the highest attack we've had on a monster yet, at 3,500. And I do have the other two cards in question here in a second. So this is Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth. So what you have to do to get this card out, you have to have this card on the field.
Okay.
And you have to equip it with this.
Okay, so while it looks very good, obviously you have to be able to have all this stuff going on.
So it's a bit tricky to get it out.
So that brings it down, yes. It could be wonderful if it worked out, but...
So what do you think?
I think that it has the potential of being very powerful, but I think that the other two make it more difficult, so I think it's medium.
This card is considered one of the worst in the game.
Okay.
Having to wait 6 turns...
I did say that.
Having to wait 6 turns for anything is not good.
Right. And you gotta have 3 cards.
And 3,500, while it is a lot, just isn't worth it at all.
Okay.
And there are way better monsters that you could play way sooner. You know, I mean, the fact that this card doesn't have any other effect, so if your opponent had a card that could destroy a monster, it's just gone. And your 6 turns are wasted. The next card is the Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere Mode. And there's a lot of text on this one, I know.
Yeah, so talk to me.
So, we'll only talk about the important part, okay? This card can be special summoned to your opponent's side of the field. And you do that by tributing 3 of your opponent's monsters, and then you give them that card.
Okay. And?
It can't attack, and your opponent can't, and it cannot be targeted for attacks or with buy card effects. That's all that's really important about it. It does have another effect, but really whether or not it's good is more...
it cannot attack. So you have wasted some of by tributing their monsters. No, that doesn't do that. I don't know. I'm confused by this.
Okay, so this is so let's just focus mostly on the fact that it's a card that you special summon to your opponent's side of the field by tributing 3 of their monsters.
You're tributing 3 of their monsters. Tributing that doesn't mean that they...
That sends them to the graveyard.
Okay. Ooh, that could be true. The fact that they're in the graveyard, they can bring them back.
True.
But Okay, so I think that you've halted your opponent enough that maybe you could beat them.
Potentially.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think?
Medium.
Medium?
To low.
This is actually a good card.
Okay.
And here's why. There are a lot of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That can prevent themselves from being destroyed in one way or another. There are cards that will say this card cannot be destroyed by card effects, this card cannot be destroyed by battle. This card, tributing doesn't count as destroying.
Okay.
So if your opponent has a card that is really hard to get rid of, you can still tribute it with that effect. And so it gets rid of that card and replaces it with a less problematic card.
Okay.
And there's a lot of other cards like that, but I think this is just probably one of the most well-known examples. So our next card, and this is our semi-final card, is Pot of Greed. The most complicated card in the game.
That's a good card. I think that's a nice card because it's good to be able to draw 2 cards.
Here's the deal.
What?
Drawing 2 cards is always good in every card game.
Mm-hmm.
In Yu-Gi-Oh, however, this card is banned and will probably be banned forever because it is that good.
Oh, wow.
Drawing 2 cards can potentially win you the game, right? Even on the first turn. Drawing 2 cards in Yu-Gi-Oh, because here's the deal with something like, if you play Magic or Pokemon, there's more hard set limits on what you can play. In Yu-Gi-Oh, so if you draw 2 cards, let's say you're playing Magic. If I play a card, there are cards in Magic that let you draw 3 cards, but you have to pay mana to play that card.
Yeah.
And then the cards that you draw, you have to pay mana to play. In Yu-Gi-Oh, you're drawing 2 cards, and then you can just play those cards. No restrictions. You know, basically, the only other restrictions is like you can only normal summon once per turn, but most of the time you're doing more special summons than not. But how good of an effect is drawing 2 cards? Let's find out. This is our last card.
And there's 10 cards from the top of your deck.
Face down. So basically, you're taking a quarter of your deck
Out.
and removing it from the game entirely for the rest of the game. It's gone.
That's not good. I don't like that.
Not good?
I think that's bad.
This card
That's got to be bad.
is good in a lot of decks.
Is it? Okay.
So here's what... Okay, it's not good in every deck, but it's good in enough decks that it does see some competitive play. The reason why, oftentimes, the duel's not going to last long enough for those 10 cards to matter. And drawing 2 cards is just... It's good. You know, it's so good that in a lot of decks, if they're playing...
You have to build a deck that makes it worth it to use it.
I would say, oftentimes you can just add it. Okay. If you're playing a deck that's already playing like 3 copies of each of the most important cards, then this card isn't going to be that big of a deal. I mean, it could be, but oftentimes, like I said, the game's not going to last that long, and you might have played another. You might already have your key cards in your hand. So this card is, like I said, not every deck, but enough that it sees some actual play, and that shows, I think, why drawing 2 cards is so powerful. For a card that makes you get rid of a quarter of your deck, to just draw 2 cards to see play, it is a very good effect. Okay. Alright, so that's it. If you want to see another one of these, let us know. If you have any suggestions for for cards that we could show in a future part, let us know. I do have some more cards here that I didn't show, but maybe we could do another one. And like I said, if you have suggestions, let us know.
If you'd like to watch us eat
Bye.
dessert and drink tea at the same time, let us know.
Yes, dessert and tea. Bye.